Hi, welcome everybody to Spirit Switchboard. I am your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are joining me on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 New Orleans. So joining me today is we're welcoming back, actually. We're welcoming back Floyd Wills, author, researcher, explorer. We're going to continue our conversation discussing his book, The Red Hair Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. So welcome back, Floyd.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Thanks for having me back on, and thanks to your audience for tuning in. I'm excited to continue our conversation. I believe the last time I was on your show, we just touched on the Paiute story of the red-haired giants and talked a little bit about the artifacts and the mummies and how the mummies disappeared, and we got into a little bit of the Masonic stuff, how one of the giant mummies was given to a lodge for ritual purposes. And I think we talked a little bit about the Denisovans and these new hominid species they were discovering, and touched a little bit about that and the relationship of Sasquatch and maybe a connection to giants. But we didn't get an opportunity to touch on the other side of it, which is the biblical accounts of the giants.
Exactly. So before we jump into that, we may have some new listeners that are new to your book and new to you. Can you give them just a little bit of history to you and your background and how the inspiration for the book started?
Absolutely. So I've been interested in ancient mysteries back since I was a kid. There was a program on called In Search Of, and it talked a lot about these types of subjects. And I was fascinated, and it led me to doing my own research, going to the school library, checking out books. And that interest pretty much carried over into adulthood. And it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I heard a presentation by a researcher named Jim Vieira, and he's done a lot of stuff on giants, particularly in North America. And he compiled a lot of newspaper articles having to do with the discovery of giant skeletons in North America. And I was absolutely intrigued when I watched his presentation, and he was citing these different articles that he found. And I thought, well, if he's finding these things, I should be able to, go and, subscribe to some of these newspaper databases, these old newspaper databases, and come up with these articles myself. And sure enough, I very quickly started compiling a folder of these giant skeleton discoveries. And so the more I researched, the more intrigued I became. And I stumbled upon a story in Nevada having to do with Lovelock Cave. And what particularly attracted me to that story was that there was skeletal evidence, photographs, eyewitness accounts of seeing these giant skulls that were once housed in a museum in Winnemucca. There are artifacts that you can still see to this day that came out of that cave. So there was a lot of evidence as far as archaeological remains and skeletal remains. And then you have the Paiute tales going back hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of years about these red-haired giants. So that's how I wound my way down this rabbit hole into the whole Lovelock Cave. And as I started researching that, then other rabbit holes started up.
And that's what happens. And that's what I enjoyed. There's just so much that I enjoyed about your book.
Thank you.
Even at the beginning, when you talk about that, your research and what you're sharing, that you were standing on the shoulders of giants that led before you. And Absolutely. I just thought that was lovely. And in throughout the book that you share so transparently that journey of research and like through emails and all of the newspaper. I love the newspaper articles that you shared and all the photographs as well too. So I just I appreciate the effort that you put into it.
Well, thank you very much. And I really wanted to be transparent. And I was fortunate. I did have a dialogue with an anthropologist at the Nevada State Museum who seemed to be very open-minded about the whole story of the red-haired giants. And he did provide me with some information that I include in the book regarding the red-haired giants. But when I started asking more questions, then the communication just suddenly stopped.
Yes. And that, I mean, that lends into the conspiracy theories, right? It's why people question if
Yeah,
people are intelligent enough to ask questions, and if you give us a snippet, we're going to grab that snippet and run for more, right? Like, so,
absolutely.
when they
Yeah.
shush up, what is it that they're
Yeah.
trying to not share?
And I think it has to do with, and I talk about it in my book about knowledge filtration, and how a lot of these academics, they're taught a specific dogma, so to speak, and they're trained to where if any new information comes in and it doesn't fit inside that that paradigm, that they automatically just kind of filter it out. They don't even
Right.
want to deal with it. Also, I think in a lot of cases, if there are some brave souls that do, their very careers can be threatened.
And demolished, like
Yeah.
torn to shreds. Just
Hmm.
for sure, their reputations and integrity are questioned and dragged through the
Yes.
mud. And and again, then I question too, when they hold back, are they holding back because um, accountability for things they may have hidden or destroyed, like not wanting to take public admission and accountability and having responsibility for
Well, absolutely.
mishandling, misinformation, any of it.
That's a great point. I mean, when a person lies and they keep having to lie, lie after lie to cover up the previous lies, and we're talking about this could be, this goes back generations. So, yeah, I mean, I think they put themselves in a position where if they were forthcoming, I mean, there would be some people that would appreciate it, but I think the public at large might be very upset for what's been kept from them
Lost,
and
right? And
lost
what's
and
been
lost.
lost.
Yes.
And then again, accountability for
Mhm.
Indigenous communities and how
Yeah.
their history has been taken away from them as well too, right? And artifacts needing to be returned to them. Like there's so
Yes.
much to the stories.
There is so much to the stories, and most of the Native American tribes in their traditions speak about giants. They speak
Mhm.
about giants, and they speak about the little people as well.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
that the tribes communicated with one another or fought as
They
well
did,
too.
yes. In fact, in the story of the red-haired giants, the Paiutes were being attacked. Well, and local tribes in that area, and this was all taking place in Nevada, were being attacked by this group of red-haired giants. They were known by various names. One of them was called Satika, which means tule eaters, and tule is a water plant. And these giants would utilize this water plant. Apparently, there was a lake not far from there, and at one point it was very marshy, and so they would make various things with these water plants. In fact, even like some sandals, tule sandals, came out of the cave. And in the last show, we talked a bit about that. There was a sandal fragment that equated to a size 29 shoe, so it fit a very, very large foot. And
Right.
and
Bigger
so
than any basketball player that we
yes,
know of.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
so these red-haired giants were cannibalistic, they were violent, and they were attacking the tribes. And the Paiutes finally had to unite with other local tribes and wage a war against these red-haired giants that lasted 3 years and finally culminated in Lovelock Cave. And the native peoples threw brush in front of the cave, lit flaming arrows, and burnt the rest of the giants to death.
And didn't, if I'm misquoting that or mistaken, please correct me. Like arrows or part of those arrows or artifacts were actually
They
found.
were. Yes, there's projectile points. In fact, there's a reference from John Reed. He was one of the miners who initially made the discovery of the mummies and artifacts. And he found out the story about the red-haired giants when he was 15 years old. He was friends with Natchez, who was the son of Chief Winnemucca, which is a very prominent chief in that area. And in their traditions, they talked about the red-haired giants, so the peoples knew, about the stories about who these people were. And in fact, when John Reed was 15, he actually went to the cave, and Natchez showed him at the entrance of the cave there were still projectile points that were embedded in some of the crevices around there where it looked like arrows had been shot. In addition, there was several excavations done at Lovelock Cave, one in 1912, shortly after the initial discovery was made, and then one a few decades later. I believe there was at least three, and I think there was one done in the 60s or 70s. But a lot of artifacts came out of the cave. There were evidence that there was a great fire within the cave. There were big black marks on the cave walls. There were bones found that had the marrow sucked out, which would seem to verify that there was some cannibalism going on.
Right. Mm-hmm. So there's two branches off of that where my head went. So there was it his daughter? Is his daughter Sarah the chief's daughter?
Yes, Sarah Winnemucca. Mm-hmm. And she wrote some memoirs, and she would travel around the country and share the traditions of her people. And she talked about the red-haired giants. She wrote about them in her book. And she even said that she had a dress that still had some of the red hair of these giants on the dress.
That seems rather brave of her to say out loud, because that's something you wouldn't want to give to anybody, because how do you know if you're going to get it back or it disappears?
Exactly. And it almost seems like there was definitely, to have the hair on her dress, that shows at least some respect that these were, fearsome opponents of the Paiutes. And there's an article that I include in my book in the Nevada area of a group. I think they were the Paiutes, and they talked about there was a giant in this area that was killing the native peoples. And finally, they sent their bravest warrior to slay this giant. And this warrior snuck up behind the giant, had a poisoned arrow, and shot the giant and killed it. And in that particular area, it was around the Truckee. They called it the Truckee River. In the article, it said there were still tracks of this giant, and that native peoples, they would, if there was like brush overgrowing it, they would clear it. And it was kind of like that area was held in reverence to them. So some of these footprints that were embedded in the ground, they would try to preserve them. So obviously, even though these giants, they were at war with these giants, there was still like a reverence or respect, because they must have been mighty warriors.
So becomes like a sacred story, which again, David and Goliath, it
yes,
has that similar storyline to it.
And leading into David and Goliath, if you want to move towards that direction into the biblical giants, we didn't get an opportunity to really touch on that. And what fascinated me about the whole story of giants mentioned in the Bible is Genesis 6. And I'll just paraphrase this. There were giants in the earth in those days and thereafter. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore them children, and they became mighty men of renown. Right. So you have this passage when I first read this when I was a young boy, I was like, giants, wow, that's interesting. And sons of God. And then it wasn't until obviously, decades later that I really started getting into the research on the giants that I started to unpack that. And so I went back into the Bible and thought, okay, it's saying that the sons of God, whoever they are, I need to find out who the sons of God are. They saw the daughters of men, meaning the daughters of the earth, were fair, and they went into them. And when they say they went into them in the Bible, they had sexual union,
right?
And they bore the women bore children, and it said these children became mighty men of renown. And I just felt that there was a whole backstory to that passage. There was a lot more to that. And in the canonized version of the Bible, we just got a little snippet of that. So I started looking into some of the books of the Bible that were the non-canonized versions that were left out of the Bible. And so I looked at books such as the Book of Enoch. There's a book called the Book of Giants, which was
that's the one I didn't know about. That was like all new info for me.
Yeah. And there's a number of other books. I think that in the book of Jubilees, it talks about the Watchers, and these fallen angels that came to the earth, and they interbred with the women. So in a number of these non-canonized books of the Bible, they talk about the story of the giants, the backstory. And in Enoch, it talks about there was a group of these Watchers. In fact, it said there was 200 of them, and basically, I believe they were angels, that they were fallen angels. Because if we go back to the canonized version of the Bible, when I mentioned the sons of God, and I thought, well, who are these? So I found there was a couple references in Job of these sons of God, and one of them basically says that Lucifer shows up before the throne of the Lord, and he was accompanied by the sons of God. So it makes that direct reference, and it's like, no, those are fallen. Those aren't human beings hanging around with Lucifer that show up in the celestial realms before the throne of the Lord. Those were celestial beings. Some people call them fallen angels. There's another reference in Job as well that says that the sons of God shouted for joy at the laying of the foundations of the earth. So this was long before humankind was created. And so here you again reference to this group, the sons of God shouted for joy at the laying of the foundations of the earth. I'm sorry, but it wasn't referencing human beings. The sons of God, they were celestial beings, and some people would call them fallen angels. And so going back to the book of Enoch, it talks about this group of watchers that found the women of the earth fair. They were attracted to the women of the earth, and they made a pact with each other. They knew they were going to get in big trouble for this, but they made a pact that they were going to go select women and have their way with them, and they did. They came down in an area in Syria. It's called Mount Hermon, which ironically the name means Mount of Desolation. And these watchers came down. They interbred with the human women, and not only that, but they taught us the forbidden arts. They taught us the arts of war. They taught us astronomy. All these different different arts that it seems to be indicated in Enoch that maybe God didn't want us to have at that time. Maybe he didn't think we were, ready for that type of knowledge, prepared. And in fact, in Freemasonry, they call that knowledge the 7 sacred sciences. And they claim that goes back to biblical times, that knowledge was actually preserved. And these watchers, so they interbred with the women. The women birthed these giants, and they were called Nephilim. Nephilim is a Proto-Hebrew word meaning fallen ones, and they were giants. And these Nephilim started destroying the earth. They were cannibalistic. They drank blood, and they were wiping out the humans. They were destroying plant and animal life. And there was an interesting reference in Enoch. It almost sounds like genetic type engineering, because it said they even corrupted the plant and animal life. And I thought, wow, what do you thoughts on?
So isn't that chapter called "It's All in the DNA"? Isn't that like
Yes,
it's all
like
that it's in the DNA?
It's in the
I totally I don't know if I have an opinion about it. I just get lots of questions. Like, and what about this? Like fallen angels. Well, really, when I hear fallen angels, I always go to aliens. So to me, that's where I go.
Well, and here's the thing, right? So if you look at it just from a straightforward perspective, if these beings did not originate on the earth and they came from somewhere else, I mean, technically, what does that make them?
Yeah, and
you could say extraterrestrial.
And the language that they would have had, and the way they would have been able to describe what they have, happening, that experience happening. So I don't know. I think it's open to interpretation.
It's up to interpretation, and it's very fascinating because these giants were they were ravaging the earth, and they even started fighting amongst themselves, and finally in Enoch, it says that God saw that that everything was getting corrupted, and he had to put an end to it. And so according to Enoch, that's why the great deluge or the great flood was sent. It wasn't for the fact that humankind was just so sinful. It was the fact that we had this extra, if you want to call it extraterrestrial DNA, injected into our DNA, and it was causing so many havoc that God needed a method to basically cleanse the earth.
Like the Staples reset button.
Yeah.
It's like, let's reset.
We're like, yes. And even in the Bible, like it talks about how Noah, it talks a lot about that, he was not just a good man, but his bloodline. It talks about his bloodline being pure. And so it talks a lot about bloodlines, and you kind of wonder, like, why is that so, very important?
Yeah. And I have to be honest about that too. I kind of cover my eyes and peek at that whole line of thinking, because I'm not sure I'm ready to go there. Like,
yes. Yeah.
What? Because then I have all kinds of, what does that mean? And where does that go? And that rabbit hole will keep me awake at night.
Absolutely. And
I just know.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. We touched on this before, and it's like after 4 years of research, I thought I was going to answer a lot of my own questions. And in fact, I walk away, with more questions. And
so even having the more questions, have you found like the more questions you have, the more synchronicities happen with people with that next answer to that question and lead you to hear it? And it just feels like this deep dive that we're never really going to come to a conclusion.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
I mean, and I'm okay with the wonderment of it, because I want to feel like a kid on Christmas morning every day.
Yes, that's like me too. I'm a very curious person, and I love to learn. So I can just keep researching this stuff. And even though, I don't necessarily have all the answers that I would like, I'm still excited and driven to just keep learning, because there are like new discoveries being made that are astounding.
Always. And we're foolish to believe that we're not, that we've come to the conclusion of things, that we're going to know everything. There's always going to be a new discovery that could change the whole course of what we believed prior.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And I just want to comment really quickly for people who, are listening in that maybe didn't listen to the first episode that you were on, the first segment, that in your book, you're not presenting anything from an opinion. It's not an opinion-based book. It is just researching different facts from different perspectives, all different perspectives, not necessarily a religious perspective. So it's like, here's everything that I've researched, and you leave it on our lap to absorb and process and come to our own conclusion. And I don't even think that we can come to a conclusion. We need to come to more deep dives on our own that can help even your research grow. Right? Like,
yes. Yeah, you really summarized my whole purpose of the book. And again, it was just doing as much research as I could, from looking at it from a lot of different angles, and going into the ancient texts, going into the extraterrestrial side of things, going into the anthropology, archaeological side of things, and just presenting the evidence that I found. And again, it's like laying it out before you, and it's like, you take a look at this, and you come to your own conclusions,
or come up with more questions, right? And coming up with more questions, because it's how, when we're questioning, then everybody's going to come with a different set of experiences and knowledge and backgrounds, even trauma.
Yes.
Like, everyone's going to bring their own stuff to the table, right?
Yes.
And have different avenues or connections and networks that can bring us more, right?
Absolutely. And it's my hope that someone reads my book and they're inspired, and then they maybe do their own research and uncover things that I didn't find. And it's just to kind of add to that knowledge base.
Because internationally, like It's not that it needs to come from the back door either. It could come from international, because these giants and evidence is international. It's not. It's
Right. Yeah, it's all over the world. And if you look in most of the major cultures, most ancient cultures, they will make references in one form or another to the giants. I've kind of focused particularly in the area of North America is where I focused my book. But yeah, it's worldwide, and it's mentioned in about every culture.
and I think when you start questioning things too, you need to be um, clear about what your intentions are to begin with, clear with
Yeah.
what your intentions are, and bringing hopefully some level of integrity and responsibility to what you're wanting to present. Even if you're being as open and honest and
Yes.
transparent as you can still like is it, yeah, Graham Hancock be labeled as like the most dangerous like his
Yeah.
information, like you still can poke a hornet's nest with people who are fear-based if you
Absolutely.
are
Yes.
trying to challenge their belief systems, right? What is your phrase again that you call that? In
Um,
knowledge
Knowledge filtration. Yeah.
knowledge filtration. Yeah.
Knowledge filtration. Yeah, and you mentioned beliefs, and yeah, beliefs are obviously are very powerful things, and a belief doesn't even have to be true, only that we believe that is true. And most of our behaviors and thinking patterns, they come from what? Our beliefs, which is
Hmm.
our interpretations, our experiences in life. And you'd mentioned traumatic events earlier on. Trauma can form beliefs. Our society in which we live, our culture is influencing us or trying to influence us in many ways. Advertisements,
Mm.
politics. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all around us.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel that's why I really appreciated how you presented the information. There really wasn't a steer one way or the other. It's just like, here you go.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that, because that's my goal. And there are some other areas, some other lines of thinking that I didn't include in my book, and perhaps in my second book, when I touch on the story of the red-haired giants again, and amongst other topics, then maybe I can include more of those different perspectives as well.
Are you hinting that that's in progress or in research
Well, I've
development?
I've composed a lot of research just off of my first book, and I
Right,
really had to cut my first book short because I had so much information. That book could have easily been 600 or 700 pages, and then
right.
I finally had to stop myself and say, Floyd, you better stop, because most folks are not going to want to pick up a 600 or 700 page book and get into. Although there are some, but not,
Me,
yeah,
I'm one of
me
them. Yeah,
too. But
I'm a ferocious reader, so like
yeah,
600. Yeah, no, that's not an issue for me. But
yeah.
did you find though, once you started researching, did it become all consuming? Did you find that hard to have the shut off, and now I'm needing to be present in this moment, and this is what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a tendency when no matter what it is I do, if it's something I really enjoy and I'm passionate about, sometimes it can be a challenge to kind of shut that energy off, as I
Hmm.
put so much focus in that area. And we're talking about, a particular line of subjects that I believe I mean, this affects us on many levels: our belief systems, our culture, your view of religion,
Hmm.
our whole history. And so to me, this a lot of my energy went into this. And yes, there was times where it was hard for me to say, okay, I need to slow this down, or I need to shut this off so I can be present in other areas of my life.
Did you have a belief system that changed during the process of research, or
Mhm. That's a very great question. I don't necessarily know if I've had a belief system that changed. I consider myself to be a very open-minded person.
Mhm.
I do come from, my spiritual beliefs is from a Christian background, but I have, an open mind enough to say, I really believe the Creator created a lot of other advanced, intelligent, species and creations out there. And I believe in UFOs. I believe, there are
Mhm.
other planets that have intelligent beings. I believe in other dimensions, and there's probably interdimensional beings coming, in and out,
Mhm.
to our existence. Yeah, I've always considered myself very open. I have a fascination with ancient history, and in other cultures. When I was younger, I had an opportunity to travel overseas to a lot of different cultures, and
Amazing.
always a curiosity. So I wouldn't necessarily, I can't really think of a belief that was changed on my part, but it's just been an amazing journey just to uncover some of this ancient knowledge, and especially going back into the texts such as the Bible, and relooking at that, and looking at the non-canonized versions of books of the Bible that were left out, and trying to see, like, well, wait a minute, this seems like this is a backstory to some of what's in the Bible.
So, would there be stories that are similar in other religions? Like,
That's
so not just
Yes, excellent question. And in fact, I touch on that in my book, having to do with the ancient Sumerian culture, and how the story of the giants, as far as from a Christian perspective, it kind of parallels that of the ancient Sumerians, because they talk about, I mean, this is going back 5,000 years ago. They talked about these giant beings that came from the sky. They were called the Anunnaki, which mean those from whom heaven to earth came. And they basically taught them everything. They taught that whole culture everything: architecture, astronomy, agriculture, and how they brought this knowledge to their people. And they were looked at as gods. There's even depictions of them, sitting on thrones, and their subject is standing before them. And this individual that's sitting on the throne, one of these Anunnaki, if you look at their height, they're as tall as the person standing before them, but yet they're in the seated position. And if they
right.
stood up, they'd be twice that size. So you can say, oh, that could just be a metaphorical, and that the royalty was just depicted as being bigger because they were more important or a higher status, and
Yeah.
that's absolutely
Isn't that how
possible.
they sorry to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Um, like how they depict Buddha. Buddha was not necessarily with a big belly, but it was just his chi. So they make, those depictions as his belly is big because it's the energy. So how they're
Yeah,
representing him.
it's how they're representing. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the ancient Sumerian culture really talks a lot about the Anunnaki, and there were they ended up fighting amongst themselves, and they ended up leaving. And so all these parallels were like, okay, so they came, they brought knowledge, advanced civilization. Well, supposedly the Watchers came down and they gave this knowledge, and it advanced things. But yet there was this internal war. There were these wars going on, and the Anunnaki, they left, and they basically set up the whole concept of kingship, where the king, they would appoint the kings, and the kings would be the representative on Earth of the Anunnaki, where the whole concept of kingship, in a
Yeah.
bunch of different cultures, is supposed to represent that, like, this is your representative of God, whatever that culture's concept of God is.
Right. I've always had I've always had this ability to see and hear spirits, people that are crossed
Hmm.
over from the time I was little to now. So
Hmm.
for me, especially in my teenage years, I would really anything alien, UFOs,
Interesting.
uh, Sasquatch. I was all over that because I had that sense of wonder. If I had this, what I knew was my truth, that was gave me that sense of wonder. I needed to be open-minded that of course there's going
Yes,
to be more.
it's essential. Yes.
There is more. It has to be more, So
Hmm.
in a way, not that it was necessarily validating me, but it was, you know, there was some level of comfort, even though it was so far outside of the box, right? I think
Hmm.
I think I had to hit. in my 40s before I felt comfortable really to say all that stuff out loud.
Yeah.
Like you have to find your community, because it really
Mhm.
does. It really does poke the bear for
Yeah,
sure.
it ruffles a lot of you can ruffle someone's feathers, especially if it impacts their belief system. So yeah, I've just found that I have to be tactful as far as like when I'm talking
Yeah.
about this stuff, like being another thing is being very respectful to people in different cultures, different belief systems,
Yeah.
whether they believe in God, whether they don't believe in that there's a creator.
Yeah. I got that from my grandpa. My mom's dad was a character. Like he was a character.
Mhm.
And if it didn't matter what religion they were, if they knocked on the door and wanted to talk about it, my grandpa would invite them in. He would talk to them for hours. And
Wow.
my grandma would get so, why did you let why did you let them in and then tell me to make them coffee? Like,
Right.
but he had that same sense of curiosity, and
Yes.
especially around religion. Like
Mhm.
he and the stories of it, because that's what he used to tell us all the time too, that there has to be some truth to the main core of these stories, because
Mhm.
there's similar stories repeated in every religion.
Yes, that's very, very true. Yep. I think we talked about that last time. We talked about where there's
Yeah.
smoke, there's fire. And,
Yeah.
behind a lot of these legends or myths, there's usually kernels of truth.
Yes. And so I had another thought when we were talking about if your belief system changed. So
Mhm.
not even necessarily, I believe, so being open-minded, have you found um I want to use the word jaded, but that may be a little harsh. Have you found there's your spidey senses go up when you know that something um is being kept from you, or do you feel a little more jaded? Like when we deep dive into the history of the Smithsonian in particular, we know that they have
Yeah.
destroyed things. And like, did you find yourself feeling frustrated with certain um yeah, I don't know if I'm phrasing
Yeah.
this right,
No,
but do you know
no,
the gist of what I'm getting at?
yeah, it's a great question. And yes, I mean, I just think I think for me, it's not necessarily so much frustration. It's more of kind of like a disappointment or a sadness that
Yeah,
this
yeah.
information's been kept from us. And I believe there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the world where there's a lot of deception and there's a lot of things, being used for manipulation purposes. That's a whole other subject. So, I see it in the world today. Like I see what's happening now, and it's like it doesn't surprise me that some of these things have been going on for a long, long time. But when you do a deep dive and you see how far back that this
Systematic.
goes,
How system.
systematic that it goes,
Mhm.
yeah, it is eye-opening. It's definitely
Mhm.
eye-opening. It's like, I don't know if I love sci-fi movies.
Yeah,
I
oh
don't know
yeah.
if you
I
ever
was gonna
saw.
ask, just because of Leonard Nimoy, right? I was gonna,
Yeah.
are you a Trekkie or are you a
Not
Star
so much.
Wars?
Well, not a huge. I mean, Trekkie. I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie, but I love the old Star Trek. I used to watch
Mhm.
it on TV.
Right.
Love that. And Star Wars. I kind of got into the first few movies, and then I kind of got a little bit lost after that point. But I love a lot of John Carpenter's movies, and I
Mm.
really enjoyed his movies. And there's one came out in 1987 called They Live. Did you ever see that?
No. I lived in
Okay.
the middle of nowhere. Like it was a long drive to get into town.
Gotcha.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so and as an adult I have it, but I wrote it down, so I'll check it out later.
Yeah, so kind of the gist of that movie, and I don't wanna put out too many spoilers, but the whole
Okay.
concept was there was this alien invasion happening on the Earth, and the aliens are already here, and
Mm.
they're able to camouflage themselves, and they look like us. And
Mhm.
and so they've infiltrated our society, and there was a small group of scientists that found this out, and they, I don't know, they intercepted some of their communication or whatnot, and they found out this is going on. We've got to wake people up. And so they developed these sunglasses, these special lenses where if you
Oh.
put them on and you look around, you could see who's a human and who's the alien. And so if you looked up and you saw a billboard and you didn't have the glasses on, it would look like a normal billboard. But when you put these special glasses on, you could see that the billboard had these subliminal messages. It was like, keep hidden, money is your God, keep breeding, and, things like that.
We'll have to have a watch party. Maybe we need to have
a
watch party.
It's an amazing metaphor, I think, to a lot of stuff that's been going on. And it's almost like when you do a deep dive and into some of this stuff and you do a research and your mind becomes more open to it, it is almost like you're taking those glasses and you're putting them on and you're seeing things from differently.
Yeah,
you're kind of breaking out. You're starting to break out of the matrix from which we're in.
Yeah. Which pill did you take?
Which pill do you want to take? You want to take the red pill? You want to take the blue pill?
Yeah. And it really does. Like when you start moving forward and having that awareness, you can't go backwards. There's no there's absolutely no unseeing it.
That's correct.
And yeah. And I sometimes I'm grateful for the people that don't want to, necessarily move forward, because I think they can keep those of us, me, grounded.
Mm-hmm.
We can get going so hyper focused on this track that sometimes we need those people too.
Yeah, maybe they can help balance us a little bit.
We need those people too. And as long as they are, I always say open-minded skeptics are my favorite people, right?
Yes.
If you just be open-minded to have the conversation, and we're both going to learn from the conversation. Like I always expect to learn something new every day. So from any conversation that you have.
That's a very great perspective. And I have that perspective too, that whoever I meet, no matter what their status is in life, their educational level, they have something to teach me.
Mm-hmm.
Something to teach me. And I've learned some very interesting things from people that I've crossed paths with maybe one time and I've never seen it again. And they were at a total different place in their life, but it was something that they shared with me, and that was very meaningful.
I wanted to, did we touch base about the bones that were found in San Diego last time?
I don't believe.
Was it San Diego?
Well, it depends on which discovery you're talking about. Are you talking about the discovery of the mammoth bones and with the tools? Are you talking about the San Diego giant? There was a giant skeleton. The giant. Okay, so that was a San Diego giant. And I referenced that in my book and have some photographs in there. Allegedly, there were miners that found this giant mummy. It was a mummy, and it was, I don't know, close to 8 or 9 feet tall. And then that mummy ended up, a gentleman purchased it, and then he put it into a sideshow. And, back in the early days, there was a lot of those type of things, a little sideshows with these unusual, things, and people would pay their dime or whatever to go through and see it. And, obviously, a lot of things on those sideshows were hoaxes and whatever. But the question is, on the San Diego giant, was it real? Was it a legitimate mummy that was found? And so what makes this story very interesting is because we talk about the Smithsonian Institution coming in and being very interested in this giant, right? They publicly say that giants don't exist, but yet they're all over this giant mummy, and they actually purchase it. They paid money to acquire the San Diego giant. And I don't remember off the top of my head what the amount was. I think the equivalent in today's money was like maybe $15,000-$20,000, right? So for
something they don't believe in.
They don't believe it. It's like, okay, you have a giant there. We don't believe in giants, but can we give you $15,000 or $20,000 to take this off your hands? And so they purchased the giant, and then they said they did some testing on it, and they claimed that it was fake, that it was it had, the skin was kind of gelatin like, and then you never hear about it anymore. And so.
Nothing made public. It sounds like a good Penn and Teller smoke
Yeah.
their art of distraction.
It totally. And the person, the guy that they bought it from, they never leveled any charges of fraud from him. So you would think, we just paid you 15, 20 grand for this thing and it's fake, but yet we're not going to prosecute you or put you in jail or anything. So it was just a really weird story. And it to me, it just, it pointed towards the whole conspiracy that, some of these big institutions like the Smithsonian, they are interested in these things, these skeletal remains, these artifacts, and it's for that fact that they are interested, but yet they'll turn around the public and say they don't exist. But then why are you investigating it, and why are you paying money to acquire these things? I mean, to me,
and does it land in a river? Like when they're done,
exactly.
Where does it go?
And there's another example that I cite in my book of a man that had a giant skull. There was an article, I think this was out of Arizona. He unearthed this skull on his ranch, and the Smithsonian dispatched some agents to look at it, and they photographed the skull and the remains, and they wanted to purchase the skull. And the guy's like, no, I'm not giving it to you, because he knew, like, if they were going to take it to study or whatever, he wouldn't get it back. So he refused to give the Smithsonian the skull. In fact, the headline on the article was "Man Refuses to Give Giant Skeleton, to Smithsonian," or something along those lines.
So it's their own version of Men in Black.
Yes, exactly. And I'm curious, what happened to those photographs? How come the public ever seen those photographs that were taken? And why on earth, if the Smithsonian says that giants don't even exist, that they're just a myth, then why are they sending agents out to investigate these finds?
And the more that the government is releasing information about truths that they've known for a while, that's probably, to me, all of those things that we have talked about and researched are eventually going to come to light that they knew as well too. I'm just waiting for the Sasquatch one. I'm just waiting for them to, it's got to be right next.
Yes,
definitely feels like they're preparing us from their standpoint to release more and more and more, right?
Yeah, I look at it as like a dam, like a knowledge suppression dam. And and this dam has a lot of cracks in it, and it's springing holes, and the water is starting to pour through the holes. And sooner or later, I mean, enough holes are going to spring into the dam that it just can't be contained. Eventually the dam's going to break. And
you talk about imitation is the art of flattery. Can we go into of that now?
Definitely. And I was making reference to some of the elongated skulls found in Peru, and how it's called cranial deformation, and how a lot of these different cultures, the Native Americans, the Peruvian cultures, in North America, South America, even in parts of Europe, and over the area of around Russia, different countries over there, these cultures would artificially elongate their skulls. And when their children were just babies, some of them would place a board on the back of their head, and they would strap it. It's called cradle boarding, so that the head would grow to be elongated, or they would tightly bind their head with cloth to give that appearance. And so the question is, why is it that all these different cultures, thousands and thousands of miles apart, and we're told that they didn't have much in connection wise, or they never had contact early on, why is it that they're all doing this very unusual practice? And I talk about the point that, well, maybe these ancient cultures interacted with these beings that looked like that had elongated skulls. Could they have been extraterrestrials? It's possible. Could they have just been some other advanced civilization that their heads were shaped like that? That's possible as well. And so these people wanted to look like them because they looked at them as gods.
Yeah.
And so the they could pay the highest respect to these gods by trying to look like them.
You have pictures in the book, the three grays.
Yeah.
With
Yes.
those.
Oh, right. That's that's the Nazca mummies, and that's in Nazca, Peru. And many people might be familiar with that region of Peru because they're the Nazca lines, those giant glyphs that are in the desert that, in order to really see what they are, you have to literally fly above them. And there's all these different, like birds and all these just different pictures that go for miles and miles. So this is in that area where these mummies were found, and there's a lot of other unusual things there. But the Nazca mummies came forward to the public in 2010, and there was a group of tomb robbers that actually brought these mummies that they found, and they gave them to an archaeologist from France that was doing work in Peru. And the reason why they gave them to him instead of sticking them on the black market and making a bunch of money is they were amazed at how different that these mummies looked from any other mummy that they had ever seen. And I include pictures in my book. Some of them have very elongated heads. Some of them have three fingers on the hands and three toes on the feet. Some are very small. Some of them look just like aliens, like a typical gray. Some of them look like a hybrid, a cross between a Homo sapien and some type of a reptilian being.
Which comes back to DNA again.
Which comes back to DNA, and getting into
Yeah.
the DNA is these mummies have been extensively studied since 2017, and so far they have not been proven to be frauds. In fact, when I first heard about them, I watched a video. There was a bone specialist out of the United States, and she was going through the x-rays of one of these mummies, and she was, she's an expert in her field, decades of experience, and she's looking at the x-rays and going, this could not have been hoaxed. These people could not have taken animal bones and human bones and tried to create this mummy. They couldn't do it.
Right. And it comes back to uncovering. Like, we have to stay open-minded that new discoveries are always going to be possible.
Absolutely. And their DNA samples were taken out of these mummies as well. And some of them,
So
go ahead.
sorry, like how can they do that? So the bones could not have been dry unless there's some, like, is there a whole other way of testing DNA if the bones are completely dry?
Well,
Like,
these mummies, they were actually mummified. They were in a mummified state, so it wasn't just
so they would have
skeletal
marrow or something
Yeah,
that they could access.
a lot more
Mhm.
genetic testing. These weren't just like a pile of skeletons. Over
Yeah.
in Peru, I mean, in some of the deserts over there, some of the driest in the world, and so when you bury someone in the desert, it almost just naturally mummifies. But these
Mhm.
mummies, not only were they in an area where they would naturally mummify really well, but they had like some type of a paste covering them that actually helped in their preservation. So whoever buried these things, they really spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that they were in a good state of preservation. And yeah, go ahead.
Was there anything else found, like in Egyptian times? So they would put, tributes and things that they felt that
Mhm.
their loved ones were going to need on in the afterworld, right? So
Yeah.
what else was found? Was there information about that?
The Huqueros, which means the tomb robbers that turn these over to the archaeologist, they just gave them the mummies. They didn't give any artifacts or anything that were found with the mummies. But these tomb robbers claimed that there's a vast underground complex, and they know exactly where it's at, and there's all kinds of other stuff in there, but they're not revealing where it's at because they know if they do, the archaeologists are going to swoop in, and all that information it's going to be taken away.
So I wonder if they're collecting all that information and data, because you share another story where there was bones that were kept by someone from a village and not revealed until he didn't want it revealed until after he passed. Is that correct? Like, you shared
I think we talked about that
Yeah.
in the first show. It had to do with Homo longi. Was that about the
Yes.
discovery
Yep.
of the giant skull?
Yeah.
Right. And I found out about that discovery. That was after I had published my book. And in my second book, I'm definitely going to go more into the Denisovans and talk about the Homo longi discovery. But yes, it was a man in China who was doing
Yeah.
some building a bridge, and he discovered the skull. And it was a Japanese were occupying that particular part of China at that time. And so he hid the skull. He put it in a well because he knew if he would have turned it over to the Japanese, I mean, he would have never seen it again. And so on his deathbed, this man lived to a very old age. He revealed to his children where the skull was, and they went and they retrieved it, and then they turned it over to university. But that, that leads to the question is how many other discoveries are out there that have already been made, and maybe these things are sitting in someone's private collection, or maybe they're hidden. Maybe they're afraid that if they turn it over to the archaeologists or institutions like the Smithsonian, that they know they will disappear. In fact, in my book, I talk about there was a Pueblo elder, and I think he's passed away, Clifford Mahudi. And I watched a video of him talking, and he talks about the red-haired giants and how he had a friend that was kind of an explorer type, was interested in artifacts, that knows where there's a whole burial ground of these red-haired giants. And he refuses to disclose where that is, because he knows that if the archaeological institutions like Smithsonian finds out, they're going to come in and they're going to take all that away.
And if it's private, if it's just a private citizen who's got this patch of land that they decide to build on, they certainly aren't going to want their lives up.
Yes,
like that upheaval that comes with it, right? And again, how is it challenging their belief systems, and are they processing that first before they talk to anybody? It's a lot more than just it impacts every aspect of who we are, right? It's not just that we found this, it's changing everything.
Yes,
for sure. Greys. Let's go back to the Greys.
Go back to the Greys. Well, some of these mummies look like this, stereotypical Grey, and they have no sexual organs. They have no noses, no ears. They have the long arms, elongated head, big eyes. Could these be like real evidence, like archaeological evidence that are some of these things Grey aliens? Could be. Could it also be that maybe these mummies are from the earth, and maybe this is the first time we've discovered this species? And I even touch on the possibility is, could they have evolved? Could they have even evolved from the dinosaurs? In fact, back in the 1980s, there was a paleontologist out of Canada. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he had a theory. He was like, well, if the dinosaurs if the dinosaurs weren't wiped out 65 million years ago, at least some of them would have evolved into a humanoid species, similar to us in some ways. And he actually had a statue made, and he called them a dinosaurid.
And you've got that in the book as well.
They've got that in the book. I when I was doing my research, and then I was writing about the mummies, Nazca mummies, and I was looking at some of the photographs, it triggered a memory going back to childhood, because I used to really be interested in dinosaurs. And I remember having a book on dinosaurs, and looking in the book, and it had a picture of that dinosaurid, that humanoid dinosaur, upright walking, and guess how many fingers it had on its hands?
Did it just have 3? Yeah.
Just like the Nazca mummy, Maria, one of the first ones that was turned over. And when I found that picture again, I went online, found the picture out of the book, and I include a picture of that statue in my book. And then there's a photograph of Maria, one of the first mummies turned over. And I started comparing the two, and I thought these things look very, very similar in appearance. And so could this paleontologist from Canada, could he have been onto something? Could these beings actually have somehow evolved from the dinosaurs into an intelligent humanoid type of being.
And elusive underground tunnels.
Underground.
It's got all the
Underground.
same. Yeah.
Yeah, there are petroglyphs. There are petroglyphs in that area of Nazca that are thousands of years old, and guess what they depict? These beings with the big head, the big eyes, and long arms with. Can you guess how many fingers?
Just
3.
3. It's crazy, right? It's
Mhm.
mind-blowing when you
Yeah.
start going there. You have, I know that I'm taking us all over the place, and
Oh
I'm
no,
sorry
I'll go
that
wherever you want to go.
we're on the ADHD train of Carrie Lynn. So
No, it's all kind of interconnects,
it
and
is.
it's so
It does.
easy to go. I mean, it really is
But you
easy.
have a skull, and we didn't show it last time. Do you not have a replica of
I do. I have
yeah.
several replicas. I have a replica of the
Oh, I didn't know that.
Denisovan, the Homo longi. I have a replica of one of the elongated skulls of Peru. Yeah, I have a number of different. I have a replica of the Flores hobbit, the little person that was found in Indonesia.
Really?
Oh
That's
yeah,
aw that's awesome.
yeah.
I have, like, a taxidermy two-headed duckling that I've named Frankenduck. That's about
Ah!
that's what I've got.
Yeah, yeah.
Ethically sourced from a fabulous taxidermy lady from the UK.
Well, one I want to get is a jackalope. I don't have a jackalope. You know what
Oh,
a
that would be
jackalope is?
oh, yeah, I do.
My
That would be
buddy has
fun.
one. Yeah, yeah.
I have it, sitting in one of my grandma's teacups on the shelf, Mr.
Oh,
Frankenduck.
very cool.
Yeah. Okay, so the elongated skull or the Homo longi, like, could you show
Dragon
us?
skull. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let me give me a second here, and I can grab the skull, and I'll grab the one from
I'm
Peru.
sorry that I should have, asked you
Oh
this
no, that's
prior.
okay. It'll take me just a second. Hang on.
If you are just tuning in with us now, thank you for listening in on Spirit Switchboard. We have Floyd Wills with us, the author of The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. We are deep diving giants, aliens, reptilians. We're chatting about all of it. And thank you to the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 New Orleans. Okay.
Okay, so the first skull, this comes out of the Paracas region, and
Look at
this
that.
is an elongated skull. And what's interesting is there's a suture that Homo sapiens that we have. It's called a sagittal suture. They call it a bow and arrow, and it's curved, and it has a line going through it that so it looks like they call it bow and arrow because it's curved like a bow, and there's like a notched arrow going through it. On some of these skulls in Paracas, they don't have that. They're missing that sagittal suture, which is quite interesting because even if the skull was artificially elongated, they should still have the sagittal suture.
And that's
So
at the back?
that's that goes in the back. And also on some of these skulls, not this one that I have here, but they've actually found some of the Paracas skulls had 2 holes in the back of the skull. And medical doctors have examined that, and they were curious, and some have come to the conclusion that was from an evolutionary process, that their heads were so big that those particular holes were located in their skull. It was to help circulate blood because their heads are so large.
Fascinating.
So that's the Peruvian skull. This is Homo longi. This is a replica of the one that they found out of China. And
I don't think that people can actually grasp like how much big, like those eye sockets, and then
huge. And
like,
if you notice the head too, it's not really rounded like ours. It's more kind of football shaped.
yeah.
It's more football shaped. Very pronounced brow ridges. If you look at the brow, they're very, very pronounced. And they didn't have a jawbone, and so I mean, imagine a massive jawbone on the skull.
So in like the mandible isn't. I mean, it's not going to be attached. So that
Right.
But they had when they found that, were their teeth like at the top, and
I
it was
think they,
double row of
yes.
teeth. You said, was there not a double?
Well, not
Not with
on
that one.
not with this one.
Mm.
The one you're referring to is what we talked about in the first episode of the skull that allegedly came out of the Lovelock Cave, and that was
Right.
housed in a museum in Winnemucca. And what was interesting is that that skull and a number of other skulls, they were kept in the basement. They were locked in cupboards, and they were not put on public display. So if you wanted to see them, you had to ask the curator to go, and they would open up the cupboards and show you the skulls. Now, I do have some really great photographs of the large skull that came out of there. I got permission from the gentleman that has those photos. His name is Don Monroe. His friend M.K. Davis took those photos back probably 40 or 50 years ago. And yeah, it was of the big skull, and it did in the upper row of teeth. It had not a full set, an extra full set, but in medical terms, they call it supernumerary teeth, which are extra teeth in the top row.
I always think of like little kids when their teeth, they're just not coming out, and those other ones, like imagining all of that in my head and what that would look like, and why it would even be that way. There's just so many questions that are there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and it goes back. We were talking about the biblical giants, and there's a reference in the Bible of when David and his mighty men were fighting these giants. One in particular is referenced that has a double row of teeth and 6 digits on each hand.
Wasn't there bones found in the United States with 6 digits as well too?
There were a few accounts, not a lot that I came across, but there were definitely some newspaper articles that I found that talked about skeletons that had 6 fingers on each hand. The medical term for that, I think, is polydactyly, and it still happens. People still get extra digits. Obviously, it's not a very common thing. And also too, with the extra teeth, that some people still experience that. And I wonder if some of these traits that are referenced, like in such things as the Bible and other cultures as well, if those are some genetic traits perhaps that were passed on to us by these giants, whoever they were. I know in Utah there are petroglyphs there. I believe I don't know if they were from the Anasazi. I think they might have been from the Anasazi tribe, but these petroglyphs that show these giants, like it'll have like a little figure and then a giant next to it with big feet and big hands. And can you guess how many fingers they have on the hands?
So is there 6?
And on the toes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So did the blonde-haired giants? So the blonde-haired giants in Mexico. So is that right? I'm remembering correctly?
Yeah.
So were there extra digits there too?
So in the articles that I found about the blonde-haired giants in Mexico, they didn't reference that there were extra digits. The explorer that found those, his name was Paxton Hayes, and he was a real interesting character. He kind of reminded me of an Indiana Jones type. And he actually even brought some of his discoveries. I think he brought one of the skulls of these giants to the White House at that time. And I think this was like back in the 30s or 40s. And yeah, he found artifacts and these giant mummies, and it was very unusual discovery because they did have blonde hair. And they also, in a cave where he discovered these, there were also like these shelters in there that were, he said they were almost like, they were rounded, like dome shaped, and they were very unusually constructed. And he said it was almost like they were some type of like little miniature mosques. And he referenced some a different writing that they weren't able to identify. So really interesting subject.
I actually, it was interesting enough that I actually wrote the page number to the book, like in the book where it actually was, because it was like something that I wanted to go back to and reference again. Somebody is asking Contessa Martins, what about people born with a tail? Is that anything that you can speak to?
I didn't get into that in my book, but she's absolutely right. I mean, there are cases where people have been born with tails.
Is that book 2?
that might be a interesting subject to put in there. So that's a great question. It's a really interesting subject, and really, I don't I don't know
Have
what
you
to say.
researched into that at all?
I've heard about it, and I've actually seen some photographs of that, but I've not done any kind of extensive research. But it's definitely something I'd like to look more into. And then again, it goes back to, okay, so if we're having some people born with these tails, are we going back perhaps maybe into the reptilian type of thing?
So you do reference that in your book a little bit as well too. Do you?
The reptilians, I do talk about the reptilians. I'm not sure. I don't remember if I wrote anything about the people being born with tails. I don't think
that's not in
think
there.
So yeah, that's not in there. But definitely about the whole concept of the reptilians, especially with the physical evidence of the Nazca mummies that cannot be explained. And in fact, DNA was extracted from these mummies. There were elements of DNA in some of these mummies that don't match any species known on this planet, which gets really interesting. And then other mummies where the DNA comes from, they have Asian DNA and they have European DNA. In fact, the area of Europe where they trace some of these mummies is in the area of the Black Sea, which is around Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria.
So again, international, like it's not that it's just in one spot. And did they migrate?
They had to have had, because if that DNA testing shows that they came from that area, well, then how did they end up in Peru?
Yeah.
Why did they end up in Peru? And those elongated skulls, some of them have patches of red hair, auburn hair, and the native peoples over there do not have that hair color.
Hi, Howie. Hi, Sandra. Thank you guys for joining us today. Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. Is there somewhere that you would like to go until I take
it's just
bring my brain back?
Yeah, no, it's just a great discussion talking about, especially over in Peru with the elongated skull people. We were talking about, could they be extraterrestrials? Could they have been from the earth? Because these Jaqueros said that there was these tunnels underneath the ground where they found these things. Could it have been a species that had been here all along before Homo sapiens, and then they just went underground? And so there's so many interesting questions. There's a lot of strange.
Or both. Could they have been aliens and underground?
They could have been
right?
both, sure. Could they be both? I mean, you get into strange artifacts over there in Peru. There's the Ica stones, these stones that have carvings of men interacting with dinosaurs, fighting dinosaurs, riding dinosaurs, depictions of open heart surgery being performed.
Tell me more. Where's that? How did you? I need to know more about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting, strange things in Peru. Now, this is an area called Ica, and I write about the Ica stones in my book, a little section on them. And these Ica stones were allegedly burial stones. A lot of them were found in burials. And a lot of them were found in the rivers of the Ica region. I think it was back in the 60s. There was a time where there was flooding, and then the water levels went way down, and then these stones were being found with these unusual carvings. And there was a doctor, Javier Cabrera, I think was his name. He was interested in archaeology. He was kind of an amateur archaeologist, and he came across some of these stones, and some of his friends who would go out, and they were probably Jaqueros, probably tomb robbers or whatever. They gave him some of these stones with these drawings, these carvings in them of dinosaurs and things like that. And he became so fascinated and obsessed with them that he compiled thousands and thousands and thousands of these stones, some of them very small, some of them very, very large. And again, it depicts men interacting with dinosaurs, hunting dinosaurs, riding dinosaurs, all kinds of unusual things. There's one stone that looks like almost like Pangea, like it was a map on it. It had like a supercontinent. Like before all the continents were separated out, everything was together, is depicted on the stone. Now, there's a lot of controversy because some people say, oh, that's all a hoax, that those can't be real. And there was a guy, I think back in the 70s or 80s, who allegedly claimed he was taking a Dremel or something and carving these things, making these stones, and then he'd cover them in like chicken dung or whatever and like try to make them look old. And so in some cases, the stones were thought to be fraudulent, but there are other stones that are believed to be legit that go back thousands of years.
So could that not happen if you know that you have this legitimate piece, but you're not getting the attention, so the extra pieces are just sort of added in to help the story along, to pad it a little bit, right?
It is, and it could also be too that these people that were out looking for the stones to sell them, maybe they ran dry and they couldn't find very many more. So like, okay, let's just start making them up. Let's start making them, and then we can get money for them.
Right.
So it could very easily, and I'm not saying 100% that these things are legit. I just put them in there because it is very interesting. Some of them were thought to be fake, but there are others that researchers claim are legit, are thousands of years old. And in fact, there are references by the Spanish going back to like the 1500s, 1600s of these stones with they call them dragon stones.
So I'm all for that. Like, I'd be okay with that.
So who knows?
Just like as soon as you said like open heart surgery, I'm just envisioning that scene in Indiana Jones, where he's putting his hand in and pulling out this heart, like,
yeah,
crazy.
Yeah. So Peru is such an interesting country. There are so many unusual things.
So would fact and folklore mix, and how do you know where the fact stops and the folklore takes over?
Right. And that's the hard part. And what I tried to look at, or as much as I could, is there any physical evidence? I mean, what evidence do we have? And that's why I am so jazzed up about the Nazca mummies, because here we have something that we can test. We can do DNA tests, we can do bone scans, we can do, we've got it. And so, with those types of mummies, artifacts, that really lends a lot of credence. Of course, other things, the stories, the legends, what's carved on the wall and the petroglyphs. I mean, those are all open to interpretation. So yeah, I mean, it can be very hard. Like, where does myth end and reality happen, or where does reality happen and myth end? It's all intermixed, and I think you have to look at it from a number of different perspectives.
Sandra, could you just maybe share a little bit about what your stepdad wrote about, so we can bring that back into the, bring that into the conversation? And while you're responding, Sandra, I wanted to ask, so, when you're presented with all of this, how did you discern? Like, I mean, you're fact collecting, so that stacks up. So then what was the discernment process for you in paring down?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to cite all my sources. So I would look at other researchers' works on some of these things, and things
Not just Reddit.
Yeah, not just exactly. Exactly. And so I provide sources for my material. I wanted to kind of write it almost like I was writing a college paper, where you have to cite all your sources and everything, but I wanted to make it fun and interesting and not just dry. And so yeah, I mean, I like I said, I was on the shoulders of giants before me, so I would
and the way that you write it, you really do take us along that journey with you, and that was a great perspective.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So, you could only, with a lot of this stuff, like you had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of stories, oral traditions that are passed on. And so it can be very hard to discern. To me, I think the most compelling evidence of extraterrestrial influence, whether you call them extraterrestrials or whether you call them celestial beings, fallen angels, or whatever, do go back to these ancient cultures throughout the world that have very similar stories.
Yeah.
And to me, that is very compelling in what is written and
Do
what
you
is in the
find
oral traditions.
do you find that there are some communities where sharing their oral stories may be taboo? So there's information that is missing because maybe they don't feel comfortable sharing, or it's not okay to share because it's disrespectful
Absolutely.
to ancestors?
Absolutely. And I can see that in a lot of the Native American tribes. And obviously, you look how they were treated. You
Yeah.
look, their land was taken, and there was a lot of crimes committed against them. They were wiped. A lot of them were wiped out. They were given
Well,
blankets
everything
with
was stolen, like their
everything was,
language.
yeah, everything was stolen. And so, yeah, a lot of those tribes, the way they've been treated, they weren't going to just haphazardly present us with this information. And but I did draw from some sources. There is a lady in there, researcher, Six Killer Clark is her last name, and I'm not thinking of her first name, but she wrote a book. I reference it in my book, and it was a book on extraterrestrial encounters by the native peoples, and that's all
Mhm.
this book. The research that she did, talking with these different people and different tribes, sharing this information of their oral history of the tribes and personal encounters. And because she was Native American, she was able to build up the trust of a lot of these peoples. And it's just a really wonderful book. And I think a lot of the most compelling information comes from those types of sources, that the native indigenous cultures.
It was very important to me, when I first started doing this show. I had a long laundry list of topics that I wanted to talk about, and trying to be mindful of the resources and where the information was coming from, so that I wasn't going to share stories um, that were a whitewashed version.
Yes.
Like, giving respect and having people on that can share. So, this topic of um all of it, from giants and aliens, uh, it's also intermingled. Like, it really just, it is all enmeshed and hard
It
to
is.
pull apart. And every culture has a different perspective that they bring to it. So
Mhm.
it's it's fascinating.
It is a very fascinating, and it's, as you mentioned, it's all interconnected.
Deep dives.
Deep dives.
So what has captured your attention right now? So is book 2 being researched? Is it a bit of a mental emotional break, just filling your cup up with what brings you joy? Not that research doesn't bring you joy,
Yes,
but it is a job.
it is. Yes. Right now, I haven't done any writing yet towards my second book. I have a bunch of sources and articles kind of compiled for that next book. Right now, I'm doing a lot of podcasts, just promoting this first book. I've been at
Yeah.
this now for a year, and just going off. Back in the old days, they'd say doing a book tour, and you would travel around to bookshops or whatever. But in this
Yeah.
day and age, I could sit, in my living room and have great conversations with people like yourself from all over the world. And I've just been having a lot of fun doing that. So that's where I've been putting a lot of my energy, is just articulating, what's in my book. and trying to generate interest, people that are interested in purchasing my book and investigating some of the subjects that I talk about. But eventually I'll get back to writing and start my second book.
And I find people just, as soon as you give them a snippet, it's the what's next, right? Like that consumption in wanting more. So,
Yes.
there really is an encouragement from my perspective from you, encouraging people to do their own
Yes.
research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Do your own research. Again, like my whole concept of putting out my book is to get people interested enough where they go beyond my book, where there's a subject in the book and they go, wow, this is super interesting. What else is out there? And then they go out and look at the other sources of information.
And that there are newspaper articles, there are evidential pieces of information that can be found.
Yes. I could have put together, I could have had hundreds of pages with articles on these discoveries, and I didn't want to go down that route because there are some other books that are out there on these types of discoveries that are basically filled with newspaper articles, and that is interesting, but I didn't want to do the same thing or repeat the same thing, but I included some articles in there that were particularly interesting to me. And then I kind of went into a little more detail, kind of unpacking those articles, where in some of these other books, they're filled with these articles, but they don't give any more context to them. They just basically print the articles in the book and you just look at it and you flip the page and you go to the next article.
Yeah, it's hard to stay. It kind of makes you go cross-eyed after a while.
It does.
When it's just that, when it's just this.
Yes.
How do I want to phrase this? So, like, was it like, how did it get, not necessarily get started, but were giants the initial? I know that you said, like, yeah.
They were the initial. When I saw that Jim Vieira presentation,
Yeah.
I became super fascinated on the whole subject of giants. And then it kind of branched out from there. The more research I did onto the giants, then I started looking at, again, I was like looking at things like the ancient Sumerian culture and the Anunnaki. And I include stuff in there on Gilgamesh, King Gilgamesh, that goes back to the first the epic of Gilgamesh, one of the first epics in history, and that was of King Gilgamesh, and he was a giant, and he was allegedly part human and part Anunnaki.
Can I ask you, so you have an educational background that is a little more, like, it's not esoteric, but it can be esoteric. It kind of, can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. My educational background is I have a bachelor's degree in human development. I'm currently working on a master's in clinical counseling, and I have a background. I've been trained in hypnotherapy and neurolinguistic psychology. And I've always had a very curious mind and just interested in mysteries. And so that would naturally include not just the mysteries in our world, but the mysteries up here, the mysteries of the mind. And there's a lot in there, and consciousness. And
yes, so that was where I wanted to, to start. If you're open to those,
I'm open wherever you want to go.
Yeah,
I'll go.
so
I love the topic.
When you do hypnosis or lucid dreaming, personally, I don't necessarily want to do lucid dreaming. I try to step away from a lot of things because I spend so much time in there with clients in that space, like on my off time. I just want a Stephen King book and something that is like with the dogs on the couch, a little more grounded. So but do you set the intention to go to those places to maybe understand more about the topics that you're interested in? Like, am I phrasing that?
Yeah, that's a very, very fascinating question. Yeah.
Like, is it
So
something that you've tried?
yeah, it's yeah, nothing really that I've tried doing. I mean, I just become so engrossed, like no matter what I do, whether it's like my research, whether it's into psychology or into the ancient mysteries. I'm a martial artist, whether it's focusing on a particular area of martial arts. I've always had this ability that I can engross myself in whatever subject that
Right.
I'm really, really interested in. So like with the whole line of ancient mysteries and stuff, I've never even really thought of, and that's a great question. And maybe it's something I could explore. But I've never like intentionally said, oh, okay, I'm gonna go into this meditative or hypnotic state and maybe focus on an area of my book and see if I can draw on information or use that
Yeah.
conscious level of mind to in that area. That's a very interesting question.
Like,
It's
where would it take you if
where would it
you
where would it
tapped
take me?
into remote viewing and asked them to show you through their eyes? If we're part of a collective consciousness of one, do you
Super fascinating. Yeah, I've never gone down that road. I was on a
welcome to Carrie Lynn's brain.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's definitely food for thought. And I was
Yeah.
just on a recent podcast, and we were talking about these types of subjects, and then got into one of the main subjects was our extraterrestrial beings that are coming here. Are they us in the future? And
Oh,
so we got on this really interesting subject, and we got into consciousness, and we got into remote viewing, and
I
you
love
know
remote viewing.
remote viewing, yes. And
It's yeah, I go there when especially if I'm doing a public event. If I'm
mhm,
doing a public event, I find I get a little more self-conscious about it, and I just tread into it a little tiny bit so I don't wig people out too much,
yeah,
because I'll say, okay, so your person's coming through in spirit, and if I was laying on your bed and my head is on the headboard, and then everybody is
mhm.
like freaking out, but it's like, so this is how your room is all laid out. And this is where I
Yeah,
got over here, and we're going over here, and it freaks people out. But I've always wondered, like, I know that I hold myself back as
mhm.
well too, because I tiptoe in. How far can it actually go? And that was one of those thoughts that I've had, is if you can tap into that collective consciousness, can you have those conversations with those higher beings, and can they point you in the direction for
Yeah,
like you being used as the tool for their message?
yeah, that's very, very interesting. I got to a point in my book, where I almost felt like I was in a flow, and it wasn't like I did any kind of meditation or hypnosis to help, like you said, like tap into this other sources of knowledge. But I got to the point where I felt like the book began to write itself. I don't
Yeah,
know if it
see?
makes sense, but
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
it
I
does
just
to me.
yeah,
Yes,
like
it
it was
does.
almost writing itself. I was seeing all these connections were popping up, and things were connecting and flowing. And yeah, it just felt like it's at a certain point that it really started to write itself.
Yeah, and that was part of, I know that I had emailed you earlier this morning, and I said synchronicities
Uh-huh.
are magical, and
Yes.
that's sort of how I see, if you are thoughts, words, deeds, actions are in flow with what your path and purpose is, there's so much ease to it. And it's like each little stepping stone shows up. And
Yes.
as long as you're trusting and moving forward, more and more is going to happen for you. Right.
Absolutely.
Um, and I wondered if that was part of how the book process was for you, and if the lull is giving you an opportunity to recharge your batteries, because the next channeling out of is going to be an even deeper dive.
Wow. Yeah, you articulated that really well. And I definitely feel that's what's happening. I think on the first show, did I tell you about my neighbor that I ran into, that I always talk to, and he had several Bigfoot encounters.
I'm
And
not sure, but
yeah, so I'll just summarize the
yeah.
story really quick. This is really interesting. There's a gentleman. His name's Andy. He's an older gentleman. He in my neighborhood, always walking his dogs, and I always come up and we we talk, and of course I love dogs. I'm always petting on his dogs, and one of these days one of these times he was like, Floyd, he goes, how was your weekend? I said, oh, it was great. I took my boys into Oregon and we went to the North American Bigfoot Museum, and his eyes light up and he goes, Bigfoot? He goes, I had 2 encounters with Bigfoot. And I'm like, what? I'm like, really? And he's like, yes. And so he starts going into these details of these 2 encounters that he had, probably a 30-minute drive from where we live now. And this was about 10 years ago. And he started giving me a lot of this information. I said, Andy, I said, has anyone ever documented this? And he goes, no. He goes, I called into Coast to Coast years ago, and I was waiting on hold to talk to George Norrie, and I got cut off, and I never was able to get back on there. And I said, would you mind if one of these times I came over with my laptop and just sat down with you and documented these encounters? And he said, oh yeah. So I went over there and spent about 2 or 3 hours, and he gave me 2 very detailed descriptions of these encounters. And there was multiple witnesses, himself, his grandson, and another friend of his. And the first encounter and the second encounter, it was him and his grandson. And then he had a third encounter, not with a Sasquatch, and this was in the same area, it was more of a paranormal type encounter, which I thought was very interesting. There were some Native American stories over in that area that he was at of like a black, I don't know if it was a black mountain lion or a black puma or something like that. And he said that he saw this thing. It was at night, and he saw the eyes were glowing. And he said it was like some type of a giant black cat, and they kind of floated. And he goes into some other strange stuff, but it was definitely some type of a paranormal experience. But yeah.
And it just, did he want to question it to know more, or was it okay that it was just an experience and we're going to leave it at
No,
that?
he wanted to question it. In fact, he said after the first Bigfoot encounter, he actually wanted to go find Bigfoot, and he went back out to that location. He said the initial encounters that he had, him, his grandson, and friend were riding on dirt bikes on these old logging roads, and they encountered this thing. And he said the second time around, he goes, Floyd, he goes, I actually got a quad because I can be able to go in areas that I couldn't with the dirt bike. And he actually went out there. He had a rifle too. Not that he wanted to hunt, not that he wanted to shoot it, but he was just thinking there's something out there. And so he just felt more secure bringing a rifle along. And so, yes, he was compelled to like find this thing.
So I'm going to bring that back. Is it collective consciousness that they are also part of? So those experiences happen because they want you to have that experience, because it initiates awareness and gets a ripple going of information seeking and sharing.
That is a fantastic question. Yeah. One thing he did say in the first encounter, and I won't go into all the details. I think I'm going to get his permission to publish those encounters in my second book. But he did say that he felt that this Sasquatch or Bigfoot, he said it felt like it was playing with his mind.
See? Yeah.
He said it was playing with his mind. He said he used the term, it was like a magician.
But people say the same thing about alien interactions as well too, right?
Yes.
That there's a telepathic connection.
Absolutely.
That happens. So, and it would be interesting too if there would be a way. So my brain just went 18 different directions. So like looking at where he had that encounter and what year it was, and were there other encounters that were publicized or reported, or were there alien stories, lights
that's something I'm going to look
right?
into.
Like,
yep, that's definitely something I'm going to look into. Also, the native tribes in that area, that their oral history on that area.
Yeah, if they feel comfortable in sharing, right?
If they feel comfortable in sharing, absolutely, yeah.
Because there's definitely, and their perspective, and I guess for us to be aware too. I know that I had shared with you about having Thomas Seawood on as well too. Like their perspective is not always it's not the same as ours. It's not going to be status quo, and I just tend to lean more in alignment with their belief systems, for sure.
Absolutely. And
You
it's
know?
about being
Mhm.
respectful as well, always trying to be respectful.
Mhm. Mhm. And that they interacted. That's the part I think that I'm so attracted to, is that there's an ease with those conversations and beliefs where there's not necessarily judgment
Mhm.
or a ridicule. It
Mhm.
is, that this is our history, that these interactions happened, and you know, white people came along and wrecked everything. Like,
Right.
in so
Yes.
many different ways. So,
Mhm.
removing those stories. Please don't email me with any angriness. I'm open to having a discussion, though, if you'd like to have a discussion.
Yeah.
Backpedal. So if we're talking about, because I know that you had talked about your boys, are they open-minded? Like, I know that I was really careful about, I call it coming out of the witchy woo closet, even though this was my normal for my whole lifetime. I was very careful with still presenting my children with different ideas and concepts, and my interest. I've had a Sasquatch keychain for, I don't know, 30 years now, so like they've always
Mhm.
seen this, but
Yeah.
you know careful about and cognizant of what I do would reflect onto them outside of the house as well too. And my kids have maybe just starting now, and my oldest son is 30, like letting people know who I am, and
Mhm.
that this is my job. So how has that been for your kids? Like, their dad is the one writing about giants and doing these podcasts
Yeah.
talking about giants,
Yeah,
and
no,
does it
that's a
change the
great topic.
dynamics, or do they feel comfortable with it? Is
No,
that okay to ask?
oh, yeah, no, that's a great subject matter to talk about. I've never been asked about that. That's really interesting. Yeah, my sons are really open to it. My oldest son is 16. In fact, I gave him a copy of my book, and I don't think he's read it all the way through, but he is reading it, and he has looked up some things kind of beyond my book. With some things in there interested him, where he's super analytical, and he likes
Mm.
to research different things, and
And that's a
so.
great perspective and help,
Mhm.
because I have 3 boys and 1 girl,
Okay.
and so she, just finished her first year of working towards her PhD. So
Oh, wow.
moving through, psychology courses and stuff like that, she would say, "Mom, they really talk not nice about people like you."
Mhm.
They have
Mm,
a pretty left brain idea
yeah.
about people like you. So she found it interesting to be in those classes, knowing what her truthful experience was within our home, and how natural and normal it was to have these concepts talked about, right?
Mhm.
But changes the narrative, right? And I think I feel that hum where the narrative is changing.
Well, your daughter's gonna, she's gonna, I mean, it's gonna be to her benefit because she's seen both sides of it. I mean,
Mhm.
growing up with you as her mom, and seeing that side of it, and then, with all the psychology and everything she's being indoctrinated in, to me, that's just going to make her that much more open-minded and receptive, and not just kind of trapped in that, again, that knowledge filtration where you go to get educated, and you're almost programmed. Well, this is reality. This is the way things are.
Yeah, it's ruffled some feathers.
Yes, I'm sure.
It ruffled some feathers, and interesting. Like when she stayed in dorms, one of the roommates that she had made friends with was of a religion where it was really, well, what I do is just not good. And I had wore one of my swag sweatshirts from one of my events, and
Mhm.
my daughter stopped me and asked me if I had a t-shirt on underneath, and to please change it, because she didn't want that ripple to happen. But watching her evolvement and feeling more confident in sharing what her belief system, and not even necessarily that it's a belief system, um true experiences that maybe she can't explain, and just being able to present
Mm.
it like, this is an experience that happened, and I can't explain why this happened, but
Mhm.
this is just what it is. So have you gone Sasquatch hunting with your boys?
I have not gone Sasquatch hunting, but I
Mm.
did talk with Andy, and he one of these times he's just like, yeah, maybe I'll go back out there again. He doesn't go camping out there anymore like he used to go camping, so it did impact him. And in fact, his daughter, when I was interviewing him, stopped by his house, and I talked with her, and she was listening to me recording his story, and she goes, "Oh, I'll tell you, Floyd, those encounters really affected him, because that was back when she was living at home." And she just looked at me and she goes, "Yeah, that definitely had an impact on my dad."
And it changes everything. So you start to question, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to read this. Joanne is just sharing, believe it or not, I've had my father and a 4-year-old tell me about 2 kids I have in my house. I've never seen them. So 2 kids in spirit.
Mm,
And sometimes I think those things present maybe when we're ready to see them, whether we're consciously aware that we're ready or have maybe subconsciously asked for a shift, right?
yeah. And getting into back to the Bigfoot, Sasquatch subject, I mean, there are some tribes, there are some people that believe that that Sasquatch is more of a spiritual being, and that it's interdimensional, and that's why we haven't found any physical remains, or that's why there's footprints, these large footprints, and then all of a sudden they disappear into nowhere. So there's some interesting, not to say that I subscribe to any one thing or another, because I'll just hold up my hands and go, I have no idea, what it
Yeah.
is. There's something out there. I
Well,
firmly believe that.
yeah, and even though I know what my experience has been my whole life, I do
Hmm.
not say I'm an expert at anything.
Hmm.
Like
Yes.
there's just no,
Yes.
because I don't understand. Because
Hmm.
even though I may have had a number of experiences that were similar repetitively for a long time, all of a sudden it shifts, and I've had this experience that makes me question all of that.
Yeah.
Like it's always shifting and changing. Like I really try to encourage everybody, like, keep a sense of wonder and
Absolutely.
face every day like a little kid waking up at Christmas morning. What is it going to bring today? Because
Yeah.
you really just don't know. And the synchronicity is like when I had mentioned it uh about the East City Ranch, and
Hmm.
we had briefly talked about it, and whether Big Brother was watching or whatever that
Hmm.
was that happened. It came up so many times after you were on the show last time.
Wow.
Like,
Interesting.
ended up reading in a book, and then somebody else mentioned it. It came up 4 different times,
Hmm.
the East City Ranch. So I think it's something that I have to pay attention to as well, right?
Yeah, I met a gentleman. This was probably 3 or 4 months ago. He had went out to East City with his wife, and they were doing a sky watch. This gentleman, he was a super nice guy, retired military. Just seemed like my impression of him, he seemed like a very genuine individual. And he was telling me, he goes, Floyd, he goes, have you ever heard the term power up as it pertains to UFOs? And I go, no. And he goes, okay, I'm gonna tell you this experience that we had at East City Ranch. We were out there doing a night watch, and we saw these orbs up in the sky, and everyone was just, I mean, they were amazed. And this gentleman looks over to his wife, and he says, wouldn't it be something if that powered up? And powered up, he said, means it intensifies. Like if there's an orb, it like gets bigger, it gets brighter. And he said, as soon as he turned to his wife and he said, wouldn't that be something if it powered up? He said, as soon as he said that, sure enough, that orb, he said, it powered up, it got bigger, it got brighter. So it was almost like it was reading his
Yes.
mind, and it just responded. And
Collective consciousness,
collective
right?
conscious, yeah.
Like tapping into it.
Hmm.
I'm really sorry, whoever. I'm just gonna pop this up here.
Okay.
But I'm sorry that we don't know your name. So it's just gonna say Facebook user. So do
Okay.
you think these beings are a part of the 4th dimension?
I am open to all possibilities.
Mhm.
I do believe in other dimensions, and I do believe there are beings that slip in and slip out. I've seen some of the UFO footage where it looks like one of these things just appears out of nowhere, and then it just disappears. I've watched Skinwalker Ranch, some of the investigations out there. That is
Okay.
interesting.
Let's talk about that. Like, it's so funny. My kids we just had this conversation 2 days ago, and they were laughing at me. I said, "So I did this thing," and they're like, "Oh, mom," because they're ready for it, right? As soon as I say I did a thing, I said, "So I became part of the Skinwalker Ranch Insiders." So I signed up for the year just so I could watch their 24/7 surveillance video cameras
Oh,
and
wow.
just watch.
Yeah.
And that in itself is fascinating. Like,
Mhm.
watching those live video feeds of their security cameras. And again, I think that I not so much about it being the conspiracy theory with Skinwalker Ranch and all the things that it brings up. I think that I appreciate the transparency that this investigation that they're doing now is bringing, and being very open that they want people to participate, because they've had people watching at 2:00 in the morning, catching things as well too, and bringing
Mhm.
it to their attention. So I think that, again, that collective consciousness is coming together to help bring more awareness, right? But
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I cut you off in my excitement, but
No,
yeah,
no,
my kids all laughed at me that I signed up for, like, to be an insider, and I went, it's possibly could be a bad thing because I'll hyper focus if I'm not careful,
yeah.
but there's definitely it's just fascinating.
That's very interesting. I didn't even know they had such a program. Now I'm gonna have to check that out with the
I'll send you
surveillance cameras.
I'll
My goodness.
send the link. You get
Wow.
your first 7 days free, then they take it's really a small amount of
Small
money
amount.
that they
Sure.
take for the year, and you get to it was joyful for me. I was like a little kid, like,
Oh
oh
my
my
goodness.
goodness.
Have you seen anything yet, or?
So I haven't seen anything yet, but what I did find fascinating and appreciating on a human level, like asking you, like, how did this affect you and your family? Did it change the dynamics with your children when
Mhm,
you were
mhm.
researching these things? So they do a lot of in Canada, we're getting the new season. uh, in the United States, it's already been, like, it started in April. So that season 4 is finished. So they were doing like roundtable Q&A discussions on after the show. So I'm already up to speed because I watched all of that backlog of
Okay.
videos, right? So now, the first episode aired here in Canada last weekend. But what I enjoyed was, the, again, transparency, frustration, these questions, the willingness to take repetitive questions from people, and their
Mhm.
patience with people, and trying to discuss scientific experiments in a way for people to understand and process, right? And I appreciate that part of them, again, right? It makes it
Mhm.
relatable for people to be more open-minded and part of the process, and um advocating for transparency, not necessarily shooting them down, and kiboshing the narrative because it ruffles their belief system. Yeah, we'll go there. But I'll send you the link if you're interested. But
Yeah, how fun. Yeah, I didn't know such a thing exists. I think it's a fantastic idea, and you talk about transparency, and I think that's just an awesome way to
Mhm.
build that transparency, is you get people involved,
Yeah.
you get people involved in it.
And people want a community, and when you are outside of the box and in what your interests are, having that community that does feel like a safe place to talk about it
Yeah.
is so important, because these were things that you didn't necessarily talk about before. It was just not talked about. Paranormal, outside of the box. And
Mhm.
Skinwalker Ranch was something that I was interested in when is it Thomas Bigelow? When he owned it, there was like all kinds of research that happened that's always been kept away
Mhm.
from everybody and not shared, which just, for me, that always fuels even more. But
And that was
yeah,
government research, wasn't it?
yeah, it was
Yeah.
government research
Mhm.
that wasn't allowed to share. Um, let me see. Let me see if I can. You know what, Brenda? I will post it through. I don't know if I can do this right now. but I will see. Honestly, if you Google search, I think it's just Skinwalker Ranch. If you look for their website, it's all right there. Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, but it is a thing. The show is actually, they have a new show as well too. Contessa, you were asking what the show is called. So it's The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. And they have a new show that has started last week. Well, for us in Canada, so it could have already played in the United States, called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, which totally got me excited because now they're looking at, so just like with Giants, right? It's international. It's not just, are there these other ranches and other places that are having similar, experiences, and are they all interconnected, and do they map out, and how do they interconnect? So they're taking some of the same team and researching other places now.
Very interesting.
Isn't it? It's fabulous.
Another rabbit hole.
It is another rabbit hole, and my dogs don't mind. We just we grab our snacks and we head to the couch and we head down the rabbit hole. Where can people find your books?
Bookbaby.com.
Book period, but plural soon to be.
Yeah. So bookbaby.com. I would encourage anyone that's interested in my book to go there. They're real supportive of self-published authors like myself. I'm also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. If people would, rather go there as well, I'm on there. And I do have a website at theancientgiants.com, and you can find a little more information on my background and my research. I have a chapter breakdown on my website that goes in depth into what's in each chapter, and there are some podcast links on there of other shows that I've done. So. Yeah,
you've been asked, and I know that I mentioned on the last show, like even in the Ukraine, you had a podcast in the Ukraine, which was brilliant. So
I just did one out of New Zealand and
really,
out of England, and another one coming up that's going to be, I think, out of Germany. So
super fun. Well, I hope to have you back again.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back on, and we did get more in depth into the book, and we kind of covered some ground that we didn't before, having to do with the biblical side of things. There's a lot of other topics in the books. There's one particularly interesting one on the little people. If you ever want to do a show on the little people,
I really want to do a show on the little people.
Do a show on the little people.
Okay, so would you be interested? I want to see if we can organize it. Could we, if I find another guest with a Native perspective, an Indigenous perspective, and maybe have a roundtable discussion?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I would be honored.
I'd be honored.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be fun as well too, right? And have that real time kind of Q&A happening. So let me see what I can work on and see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, so sounds fun.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. Thank you everybody for participating in the show today with your questions and comments. Thank you for following me on this Spirit Switchboard journey. Thank you to the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7. Next week, I have Rachel Nordahl coming on to talk about her book, Awaken Intuition. So it's sort of a guide book for awakening your intuition and trusting your inner wisdom, especially for beginners. So bring your questions and join us next week. So have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.